together. You hold all things together. You are before all things. You hold all things together. You are before all things. You hold all things together. You are before all things. You hold all things together. You are before all things. You hold all things together. You hold all things together. You hold all things.
The readings, yeah, because I've got to move the screen along and hold this. And no, the reading is from Leviticus 9. On the 8th day, Moses summoned Aaron and his sons, the elders of Israel. He said to Aaron, "Take a bull calf for your sin offering and a ram for your burnt offering, both without defect, and present them before the Lord. Then say to the Israelites, take a male goat for a sin offering, a calf and a lamb, both a year old, without defect, for a burnt offering, and an ox and a ram for a fellowship offering to sacrifice before the Lord, together with a grain offering mixed with olive oil. For today the Lord will appear to you." They took the things Moses commanded to the front of the tent of meeting, and the entire assembly came near and stood before the Lord. Then Moses said, "This is what the Lord has commanded you to do, so that the glory of the Lord may appear to you." Moses said to Aaron, "Come to the altar and sacrifice your sin offering and your burnt offering, and make atonement for yourself and the people. Sacrifice the offering that is for the people, and make atonement for them, as the Lord has commanded." So Aaron came to the altar and slaughtered the calf as a sin offering for himself. His sons brought the blood to him, and he dipped his finger into the blood and put it in onto the horns of the altar. The rest of the blood he poured out at the base of the altar. On the altar he burned the fat of the kidneys and the long lobe of the liver from the sin offering, as the Lord commanded Moses. The flesh and the hide he burned up outside the camp. Then he slaughtered the burnt offering. His sons handed him the blood, and he splashed it against the sides of the altar. They handed him the burnt offering piece by piece, including the head, and he burned them on the altar. He washed the internal organs and the legs and burned them on top of the burnt offering on the altar. Aaron then brought the offering that was for the people. He took the goat for the people's sin offering and slaughtered it, and offered it for a sin offering, as he did with the first one. He brought the burnt offering and offered it in the prescribed way. He also brought the grain offering, took a handful of it, and burned it on the altar, in addition to the morning's burnt offering. He slaughtered the ox and the ram as the fellowship offering for the people. His sons handed him the blood, and he splashed it against the sides of the altar. But the fat portions of the ox and the ram, the fat tail, the layer of fat, the kidneys, and the long lobe of the liver, these they laid on the breasts, and then Aaron burned the fat on the altar. Aaron waved the breasts and the right thigh before the Lord as a wave offering, as Moses commanded. Then Aaron lifted his hands toward the people and blessed them. Having sacrificed the sin offering, the burnt offering, the fellowship offering, he stepped down. Moses and Aaron then went into the tent of meeting. When they came out, they blessed the people, and the glory of the Lord appeared to all the people. Fire came out from the presence of the Lord and consumed the burnt offering and the fat portions on the altar. And when all the people saw it, they shouted for joy and fell face down.
Great. All right. Let's pray for Ali, will we? Yeah. Yeah, Father, thank you so much for Ali and the hard work she's put in to unpack this passage, Lord, and thank you for your word. And actually, this passage is full of truth. And Lord, I just pray for Ali now. I pray for your peace to rest on her. I pray that she would be your spokesperson to us this evening. Lord, your word would pierce our hearts, Lord, and we would see a glimpse of the glory of who you are. In your name, Jesus, we pray. Amen.
Well, good evening. If you don't know me, my name's Ali. And what a passage to be given. Thanks, Rob and Pete. But honestly, it is so jam-packed, as Pete says, with truth, with imagery, with amazing images that, this is too short of time to do anything. So I think I'm going to be going to the library and getting the book that Ali recommended earlier. So here goes. God speaks, doesn't he? God speaks today, and he spoke in the time of Moses, and he spoke the world into being. How then does God speak to you? Maybe it's when you read the Bible, in sung worship like we've just had, maybe through a picture that you just suddenly comes into your head, maybe through dreams, an impression that you just know is from him. Perhaps through nature, through pictures, stories, other people maybe. Question, does anyone remember this? Slide, please. Not that one. Next slide. That one. Yeah, thank you, Jacob. Does anyone remember the slogan that actually goes with this? Probably showing your age if you do. But anyone remember? No, someone was supposed to remember. What is it? Can you see? Flowers, delivery, interflora. Interflora. Come on, somebody. It was a slogan back in the yesteryear. No, communication, Penny. Oh, you haven't had enough. Okay, tell Pete you need more. Okay, the actual answer is, say it with flowers. Say it with, you did know, you see, you did know. There we go. So that's what it was. Say it with flowers, interflora. So I was thinking of that as I was studying for this today, because I've noticed something really incredible about the way that God communicates to all of us, to his creation, through the words, through images, through stories, through actions. And what he communicated to the people of the ancient world can be so powerful to us thousands of years later. It's incredible. So if I asked you what the book of Leviticus was all about, what would you say? Law, rules, maybe blood and gore, maybe. I mean, what was your reaction to the passage that Paul Jeremy had to read out there? We've just read it. It's incredible, but there is a lot of that sort of thing, isn't there, in Leviticus? Does it speak to you of a God of love or an angry, demanding God, like the many gods that were worshipped in the ancient world? You see, when we read about the giving of the law and the regulations for sacrifice in Leviticus, does it make us love God more, or does it do something quite the opposite? So Hannah, bless her, my daughter, said it with flowers this last week. It's quite a big surprise. She came home from work with this massive bunch of flowers for me that were really beautiful. And it wasn't my birthday or anything, so it was quite a lovely surprise. It was just a token of affection. But then a few days later, she jokingly said to me, "Oh, I bought you those flowers, so I thought you'd be nice to me. I shouldn't have bothered." So I know it's a silly illustration, but the point is that what started out as a gift of love became, in that jokey comment, a transaction, didn't it? If I buy you flowers, you need to be nice to me. I think when we read Leviticus, it's easy to slip into a mindset which is so conditioned by the world around us. And we can misinterpret the central message of Leviticus. And the God of the Old Testament can be seen as just another tyrannical, angry God demanding people to give endless appeasement offerings to him to keep him sweet and to stop him from destroying them. As one commentator put it, what the Bible is portraying as an expression of God's love gets twisted into something really quite dark. Our version goes something like this: God is holy and perfect, you are not. Therefore, God is angry at you or hates you, so he has to kill you. But because he's merciful, he'll let you bring this animal to him and have the animal killed instead of you. Thankfully, Jesus came to be the one who gets killed by God instead of me. Jesus rescues us from God, so now we can go forever to the happy place after we die and not the bad place. There's some truth in that, isn't there? But it is oh so wrong. This story sounds like the biblical story, but when you read the book of Leviticus and then the book of Hebrews, you can recognize how wrong this portrayal of God is. When we misunderstand the character of God, it distorts our understanding of Jesus' life, his death, and his resurrection. You see, the sacrificial system, which we will read about today, was actually a wonderful gift from a loving God who wants relationship with the humans he created. Leviticus and Hebrews show us the love of God and sacrifice as central to his rescue plan for us all. And he hasn't changed. So as we look at this story tonight, my prayer is that we will be all challenged in our understanding of the God that we see in the Old Testament. I pray that our trust and love for God will deepen as we increase our understanding of his relentless, passionate, and selfless pursuit of us. That we will see that no one is beyond his forgiveness and no one is without hope. And if you're here today and you don't know the peace that comes from being in relationship with God, I pray that this day might be a revelation for you. So we're very, very loosely following three themes as we go through this passage, and I've called them the promise, might be up there, the promise, the provision, and the presence. So that's the three themes that we're going to be following as we go through. So let's start off with the promise. So you can see it's in verse 4. I don't know whether it's worth going back, Jacob, right to the scripture. The first, I think, slide. So it's in verse 4, the promise, and it's repeated in verse 6. And it's the promise of God's appearance to the people. He says, today the Lord will appear to you, and then later in glory. So it's not just to Moses that he's promising to appear now, but to those who are gathered at the entrance of the tabernacle, where God intends to make his dwelling, right in the middle of the Israelite camp. And you might want to see a picture of the Israelite camp that I've just put there to illustrate somewhere. Thank you. So God is now, not that one, there's another one. Pan out. Oh, yes, that one. Yes, sorry. There we are. You can see the tents. That's it. So there's the tabernacle in the middle of the camp. So God is now coming to dwell in the midst of the people. And the promise is that today God will come in his glory and they will be witnesses. So the promise of God's presence with his people, was a promise of restoration of relationship between them. God wants to dwell with his people, and the people want God's protective presence. But they're sinful, and God is holy. And as they have seen, God's goodness and holiness is actually dangerous to sinful people. So I love that, because I've got Psalm 24 here, and that's what Philip read out just earlier. It reminds us of who can ascend the mountain of the Lord? Who may stand in his holy place? Who? The one who has clean hands and a pure heart, who has not set his mind on what is false, and who has not sworn deceitfully. And I love that we sang that beautiful song at the end there, didn't we? That, we're seen as blameless running into the Father's arms. Blameless people are the ones who are in God's presence. Human sin, you see, infects and defiles the world that God created. When a person sins, it's not just himself that he affects. It's also the community around him and the environment itself. God's already stated his plan to dwell in the middle of the people in this portable tent. This tabernacle has been built according to the detailed instructions given to Moses, and it reminds them in glorious detail of the Garden of Eden. It's to be a holy space, you see, a little mini Eden, not that Eden, wherever Eden is, a mini Eden, Garden of Eden, amongst the people where they can once again be near God and enjoy his protection, his blessing, and his leading. But Israel's sin defiles the camp and even the sacred place itself. And the tabernacle is the meeting place, the portal between heaven and earth. The sin and the rebellion of the people of Israel bring corruption, bring pain, bring death right into God's world. A holy God cannot stay in the middle of this corruption. And if God leaves, the nation will suffer the consequences of living in a land without God. So to deal with this issue of Israel's sin and rebellion, God introduces a symbolic ritual that takes an existing practice from among Israel's neighbors and completely transforms its meaning. Just like all humans, the Israelites are sinful and are going to keep on sinning. So they need God to purify and cleanse them. So they need a system that could turn them away from sin, that can pay the sin penalty or the debt, that can cleanse and purify the community and the tabernacle from the effects of sin and allow them to stay in God's presence. And this is where the provision comes in. And provision, of course, is the wonderful sacrificial system. So, in this light, the sacrificial system should be seen as God's incredible grace and loving kindness. His continued presence depends on it. These sacrifices were the way God would deal with sin and provide a system which they could follow to maintain a right relationship between them and God. The word we use for this is atonement, which literally, if you break it down, is at-one-ment. So, idea of two being put together at one, being at one. As Duval and Hayes put it, the entire sacrificial system is designed by God so that sinful Israel, both as individuals and as a nation, can approach, worship, and fellowship with him as he dwells right among them in the sanctuary. So I've counted, and in this particular passage, we've got 5 different offerings, and I'm not going to go through them all. But the ones central for atonement here are the sin offering and the burnt offering. And the Hebrew word for atonement is kippur, which literally means to cover. And it's got 2 main ideas connected with it. One is as a ransom, which we're probably familiar with movies, ransom. People are kidnapped, aren't they? And we think of the ransom as the amount of money that the kidnapper demands in order for the person to be freed. But if you think of it like that, we are the hostages, and sin is the kidnapper, I guess. So the hostage taker we could think of here is the sin. But that's the name, the ransom. So the idea of payment for a debt. The other idea connected with kippur, or atonement, has to do with the blood itself, which was always seen as being where the life was of the animal. So the blood represented life. And so the lifeblood was used to purify or cover the effects of sin, or death, which is the effects of sin. So the sacrificial system served in 3 ways, or the atonement system served in 3 ways. First, as a deterrent. So, when you see animals being slaughtered in the courtyard, you're going to be reminded of sin. I mean, they're being slaughtered because of the sin. So it was a very, very obvious deterrent. Secondly, as a ransom, which I've already explained, which was The animal's life was a symbolic substitute for the life of the sinner. The animal died in the place of the sinner as a ransom payment that would cover the debt of the sin. And thirdly, as a means to purify. So the blood was used to wash the environment, a bit like detergent. So the blood was life, and it would cover death in the environment. So if we go back to the passage, this is on the 8th day. So this is the 8th day. And when it says the 8th day, it sounds a bit like creation, doesn't it? This begs the question, what was happening on the other 7? If this is the 8th day, what were the other 7 all about? Aaron and sons have just undergone a 7-day consecration period in preparation for their new roles as priests of Israel. During this time, they've sacrificed animals and stayed within the entrance to the new tabernacle. The animals have been sacrificed to atone for their personal sins, probably on a daily basis. And today is the day where they're going to begin to sacrifice on behalf of the people as a whole. All of this is clearly in accordance with the directives given by God, as we're told this multiple times. And yet, who is this high priest? Have a think about it. Who is he? It's none other than the big brother of Moses, Aaron. Wasn't this the very same brother who allowed the people to make themselves a golden statue to bow down to whilst Moses was up talking to God on Mount Sinai? It's the very same man who enabled the betrayal of the people to worship a golden calf, to pour all their adoration into a created thing. And yet this Aaron, is chosen to be the one set apart as holy and enter into the most holy place near God. You see, I don't know about you, but this really reminds me of another character in the New Testament called Simon Peter, on whom Jesus chose to build the church. Peter betrayed Jesus by denying friendship with him 3 times. Both Aaron and Peter rejected God out of fear of men, and yet both were chosen to serve God in incredible ways. Perhaps there's something in this for us. Maybe some of us here can relate to these 2 characters. Maybe you're sitting here aware of some of the ways you've messed up, thinking that God can't use you, can't bless others through you. You're aware of your sin, but can't believe that God could give you a way back into relationship with him. Well, I've been there, and God is bigger than our mess-ups, and he is a God who loves to restore and to redeem. And he's shown a way back through the gift of atonement, the sacrifice of a blameless other who would die so that you and I can have life. So, let's continue. Moses tells Aaron and sons and the elders of Israel to gather animals as sacrifices for various offerings to present before the Lord. Where are they to gather? Well, before the tabernacle, which is the place where God has made his home or his dwelling place. And this holy space, this little Eden, was to be the home of the powerful Yahweh, the great I am. So, little anecdote. My lovely Kurdish mother-in-law and I could never really have much of a conversation. So we used Azo as our mediator. But, we communicated quite well through smiles and hugs and gestures, I suppose. But every time I would visit her, she would greet me with one of these big smiles and hug and kisses. And then usually with this phrase, Kumbani bum, which meant she would be my sacrifice. Isn't that interesting? It really puzzled me. What's that about? She would be my sacrifice. It was a term of endearment, of course. But, I find it really interesting when I was looking at this, because the word we usually translate as offering is this same word. It's korban in the original Hebrew. And it literally means that which is brought near. And the term karab is the verb form meaning to draw near or to cause to draw near. So we've got 24 verses in this passage, and there are 24 mentions of the word offering, so one for each verse. So offered, to draw near, is used twice, and the phrase before the Lord is used 4 times. In the English, we lose some of the effect of this in our translations. The passage reads like God's invitation for the people to come near to him. His intention is that people bring that which is brought near to his presence, which of course means they're going to have to draw near to his presence to bring that which is draw near. You get it? So the text overflows with language of closeness and with language of proximity. In verse 4, the entire assembly came near and stood before the Lord, it says. And Aaron and sons went up to the altar, which would have stood in front of the tabernacle. It's the dwelling place of the Lord, of course. And before all the people, despite his full 7 days of consecration, Aaron has to sacrifice more animals before he can minister to the people. The first is a bull calf as a sin offering. Can you think of any reason why that might be appropriate? Could it be that this was a reference to his part in the golden calf worship incident? This was an admission of his sinful state, regardless of what we understand. The worshippers would have laid hands on the heads of the animals to be sacrificed, which was like a commissioning. They were to be the representatives before holy God in their stead. And the animals would go nearer to God's presence than the individual or community could possibly go. And they would take the penalty that should have been theirs. So the animals would take that penalty and instead of them. And once the priests have offered their sacrifices, they offer them on behalf of the people, the community of Israel. Which brings us to the last point, the presence of God. The great climax of the story in this passage is at the end. Moses and Aaron go into the tabernacle and they are not consumed. They reappear. I can just imagine the people sighing with relief as they come out again. They're alive. And they come out and they bless the people. Then we are told in verse 23 that the glory of the Lord appeared to all the people. God did what he'd promised to do. He came, and he came in power. Verse 24, fire came out from the presence of the Lord and consumed the burnt offerings and the fat portions on the altar. It would have been a spectacle, an amazing display of God's power and might, like on Mount Sinai, only here God was in their midst. The burnt offering is completely consumed in what was like a lightning strike. The resulting fire was to be kept alight for future offerings. The people's response was elation and awe. They flung their bodies to the ground in reverence. Their sacrifices had been accepted, and God's presence was with them. God had made a way where there seemed to be no way. He'd provided the solution to a seemingly impossible problem, that of sin. The only appropriate response was jubilation and prostration. They knew the joy of being in God's presence, but were also acutely aware that he was holy. And when we become aware of God's awesome presence, there has to be a response. In his book, Who Shall Ascend the Mountain of the Lord, Michael Morales gives us a glimpse of what it must have been like to present a burnt offering, the olah, which means to go up, to climb, to ascend, which is what burning does, isn't it? Smoke ascends. So this is where I'm going to ask you for a video, Jacob. We're going to imagine it. We're going to just imagine time travel going back. So try and imagine it with me, okay? You've been invited to bring the animal to the courtyard outside the tabernacle where you see the Ola altar. The altar where the continual fire would be burning. This is the fire which was in the passage we read, the one started by God on the day of ordination. You see the smoke rising up, and beyond that, on either side, you see the tent with the coloured curtains with cherubim. And you're reminded of the approach to a mini Eden. The cherubim with flaming swords guarding it. The smoke seems to be coming from them. But further on, if the tent was open, maybe you see into the holy place with the altar of incense burning in front of the Holy of Holies. And so as the burnt offering, which is now representing you, is being transformed into smoke, it's going up into the sky. And it may be that you see the incense from the golden incense bowl rising up too before the throne. And these two smokes seem to merge, giving the illusion that your representative offering is symbolically entering into the throne room of God. Powerful image. The Ola, burnt offering, has been a costly act for you. You see, with most other offerings, some of the meat was given back to the worshipper and they would enjoy it. But with this one, the burnt offering, the Ola, the whole animal has been offered up in smoke. The complete surrender of the whole animal has symbolized your complete surrender and devotion to God. Your symbolic death through your perfect animal sacrifice is symbolic of re-entering Eden, the place where you can be in the presence of God. This dying in order to have life is what Jesus talks about in Matthew 16:25. For whoever wants to save their life will lose it, but whoever loses their life for me will find it. So as believers in the perfect sacrifice of Jesus, we've been invited into his death so that we can enter into his resurrection life, to be reconciled with God forever. This is what we do or start doing when we get baptized, isn't it? It's the beginning of a new life with him in which we live our lives transformed, completely surrendered to God. Romans 12 in the New Testament says, "Therefore I urge you, brothers and sisters, in view of God's mercy, to offer your bodies as living sacrifices, holy and pleasing to God, for this is your true and proper worship. Do not conform to the pattern of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. Then you will be able to test and approve what God's will is, his good, pleasing, and perfect will." So Jesus was the perfect, innocent lamb, the ultimate sacrifice, not just for one man, but for the whole world, for all time. He's also the high priest, the great high priest, the true Messiah, which means anointed one, who presented himself before God. He is also the mediator, the one who mediates between the Father and us, our advocate. And not only that, Jesus is also the Word, the one through whom the whole world was created, for he is God. So when we look at the tabernacle, when we look at all of the sacrificial system, when we look at it all, it's all about him. It's all about Jesus. The New Testament writer put it this way in John 1:14, and this is the Amplified version. "And the Word, Christ, became flesh, human, incarnate, and tabernacled, fixed his tent of flesh, lived a while amongst us. And we actually saw his glory, his honor, his majesty. Such glory as an only begotten Son receives from his Father, full of grace, favor, loving kindness, and truth. The tabernacle, the sacrificial system. This was all just a copy, pointing towards the future promise, the truly anointed one, Jesus. So when we think of the sacrificial system, we need to recognize that God is the giver of it all. We are the recipients. In his mercy, he gave us the understanding of the situation we're in, the choice we have to choose death or life. And we know sin leads to death. We've all chosen it. But he didn't leave us there in that pit of despair. The God of the Old Testament gave a way back to him, but now not through animal sacrifice, but through the ultimate sacrifice, which was himself. The Israelites were never really the givers in this sacrificial system. They were the receivers, and we are the receivers of the greatest gift of all, a way back to fellowship with God, because he was the ultimate sacrifice for us all through Jesus. So how do we respond to that? How do we respond to that tonight? I'm going to invite you to ponder the great gift that we have, to ponder Jesus. I'm going to read some extracts from Hebrew. Just feel free, just close your eyes if you like to. And as you listen, let the words move you to worship in your hearts. And after this, we'll remember his sacrifice through taking communion together. Hebrews 9, verses 11 to 12. When Christ came as high priest of the good things that are already here, he went through the greater and more perfect tabernacle that is not man-made. That is to say, not part of this creation. He did not enter by means of the blood of goats and calves, but he entered the most holy place once for all by his own blood, having obtained eternal redemption. For Christ did not enter a man-made sanctuary that was only a copy of the true one. He entered heaven itself, now to appear for us in God's presence. And Hebrews 10 says, day after day, every priest stands and performs his religious duties. Again and again, he offers the same sacrifices, which can never take away sins. But when this priest had offered for all time one sacrifice for sins, he sat down at the right hand of God, and since that time, he waits for his enemies to be made his footstool. For by one sacrifice, he has made perfect forever those who are being made holy.